everyone. It's great to be here. I'm super excited to present Rosco's contribution to the International Production Design Week on backdrops and backgrounds. I'm talking to you from London, so if you're tuning in from anywhere else in the world, welcome to the Brooklyn Bridge soft drop from Rosco's London office. So who or what is Rosco, you might be asking yourselves? Well, it's an old company, celebrated 100 years of business in 2011, so is actually now 113 years old. Rosco supplies products and solutions not only for film and television markets, but also for live entertainment, theatre and architectural markets. These days, Rosco is best known for gobos, lighting gels and filters, the DMG LED lighting range, scenic paints, lighting textiles, chroma key blue and green screen products, and last but by no means least, backdrops, known as soft drop, which are available as custom or as rentals. So I guess if you're tuning in, it's because you'd like to hear more about backdrops, which I specialize in for Rosco in Europe and the UK. And I work together with my colleagues based in America and elsewhere. And together, we make up the team that's known as Rosco Digital Imaging. So the recording that you're about to see is an updated version of a presentation which I first gave a year ago in Greece at the Gathering, which some of you might have heard of. This was a unique event for production designers and students to meet and talk about their craft and exchange shared experiences for the very first time. The recording runs at a little over 30 minutes, after which I shall be back to answer your questions. So please don't hesitate to write any that you might have in the chat box, and I'll see you later. Enjoy. Everyone, my name's Sarah Horton, and I'm here to talk to you about backgrounds for film sets, and more specifically about backdrops and how to use them and why you would use them. I'm a former art director from International Feature Films, and I had my first job in the art department as art department assistant back in 1984, which is a long time ago. And more recently, I joined Rosco and am now working as their backdrop specialist throughout Europe, as well as their day-night photographer. So now you know a little bit about me, let's get into the presentation. Rosco invented the day-night backdrop digital printing process, and my colleague, Phil Greenstreet, won a technical Oscar in 2000 for this. It's been copied by many others since, but Rosco has been producing digital backdrop prints for film and television for the past 30 years. So it's fair to say that if there's any mistakes to make, we've already made them ourselves. Why have a backdrop? It's a good question. What are the decisions that lead to choosing a backdrop? And how do you talk to people about making those decisions? And I guess the simple answer is you don't need to have a backdrop, but you often do need to have a background. And like any other creative decision on a film production, there's never a wrong or a right choice, but instead there's a range of options, all of which need to balance three basic things: cost, script, and screen values. So at the moment when the script calls for an iconic view over a city or a landscape, or there's been a creative decision to make the background a character in its own right and use it as a vehicle for illustrating the lead actor, or when the shooting schedule dictates an exterior location establisher with continuity to an interior set which is built in the studio, or, for example, when the lawyer's office is seen in every episode across a series at different times of day and night, which means it makes practical sense to build a standing set in a studio, which can also be used for weather cover on the days when the crew can't shoot outside, or when there's been a last-minute change in the production schedule, then you are going to need some kind of background. And by the way, you could swap out the lawyer's office for the homicide department or the cafe or the diner, those standing set scenes that we've all seen in every episode of a TV series. So let's have a look at that again. A background can be determined by the script, by the character, for continuity reasons, or for shooting logistics. Now, of course, what I've just shown you are all Rosco day-night backdrops. But generally speaking, it's the budget which is the overriding factor in any background decision. Most productions are going to use a mix of different backgrounds, depending on what is best suited to the parameters of each set and the chosen way to best tell the story from a creative and financial viewpoint. So there's always going to be a mixture of green screen, backlighting or other lighting effects, possibly day-night custom backdrops or rental drops, possibly projections or LED screen. So let's have a look at some of those other background solutions. Whiteout, backlighting. Backlighting with white diffusion works as a great creative decision. It's simple and it can be cost effective. And the decision to use this backlighting comes out of a visual scaffolding, if you like, which is constructed by the cinematographer and the production designer together with the director in pre-production. And it goes to make up the look of the film. And it's a scaffold, if you like, that consists of light, texture, color, and camera angles, all of which go to create the different look of the film. It's, as said, it's a simple and cost-effective, but you can't actually use it for every single shot in the film. Painted scenic backing is another tool that's available. And I'm showing here the magnificent scenic backings from Jonathan Williams, produced for a series of unfortunate events, which was designed by Rick Heinrichs for Paramount Pictures in 2004. 12 scenic artists worked on all of the drops for this film, which was entirely shot in the studio. And it's a more painterly theatrical design aesthetic, more so than a photographic backdrop, which lends itself very well to this film, which references the golden age of Hollywood epics such as The Wizard of Oz. But it does have a more limited lighting range, and it wouldn't necessarily be the correct or chosen route for other scripts and subject matter. There's only a handful of scenic artists left as well, so it's getting harder and harder to find people who are able to paint backdrops like this. And this is showing the other backdrop painted recently for Hail Caesar. It's a submarine set, which shows the full effect of the painted translucent sky. And this was painted by the lead scenic artist at JC Backings, Donald McDonald. If you'd like to know more about these great images, then these are thanks to this fantastic book, which is a definitive behind-the-scenes history of painted backdrops and the scenic artists who produced them for the golden age of Hollywood. Written by Karen Maness and Richard M. Isaacs, this was produced in collaboration with the Art Directors Guild of America, and it's well worth every penny. Moving on, green and blue screen. Green and blue screen remain the most widely used digital background replacement tools. And the decision is more often than not driven by script, showing, for example, here a script that plays in a dystopian future world. But there could also be a science fiction future or a post-apocalyptic storyline. You could also use blue or green screen for a period film where you need set extensions on the built set. And you might also want to use green screen for a small scene in the script, which only covers 1, maximum 2 days in the shooting schedule, where it doesn't make sense to build a backdrop for such a short period of time. And instead, it makes a lot more sense financially and logistically to put a green or a blue screen outside the window and shoot the scene in that way. In this image, you can see the glass coffee table and the television. So green reflections are always something that needs to be removed in post-production. And it's not necessarily just a table. It could also be a shiny floor, a glossy floor, glass screens, steel or other metal reflective surfaces, which is always something that has to be taken out in post from green screen work. There's also associated costs with green screen. You have two different lighting setups, one for the set, if there is one, and another one for the background. And there's also high associated costs in post-production. We've all seen the endless rolling credits at the end of films for the visual effects departments. And it's not as great for the actors. You can't see the results. Neither they nor the director or the cinematographer can see the results during shooting because it's a virtual setting with no in-camera effects. So what are some of the workarounds for this? Well, one of them is projections. I'm showing you two slides here that are separated by almost 10 years. On the right, from Oblivion, produced in 2013, already 10 years old. And on the left, from Solo, a Star Wars story. More recently, projection screens have also been used instead of an LED volume, sometimes for budget reasons, and sometimes because of supply chain issues with the screens themselves. But obviously, projection gets around the problem of green pollution because you use the colors of the projection to light the set. And you can see in both of these images how many reflections there are. Tom Cruise called the Oblivion set the most beautiful set he had ever shot on, and spoke of how his own work became more organic and intuitive, having the wraparound screens as a world which encased him when he was working on there. So projections use in-camera effects in a non-virtual setting, so you know what you're getting during the shoot. And it's a common reason why cinematographers don't like working with green screen. Some cinematographers don't like working with green screen. And by the way, the same is also true of a backdrop or a scenic backing. The cinematographer can bounce light off the colors of the backdrop to light the set or to reflect on shiny surfaces. But there are high associated costs with projection screens. First of all, in pre-production, you have to get your content. Oblivion needed 24 projectors covering 360 degrees, which showed footage shot especially by an extra team on top of a volcano in Hawaii, where they were above the cloud line at all times of day and night. And then you have associated costs during shooting because a multiple projector setup in the studio means an on-set crew there to control it, to sync it to the camera and to the other projectors. There needs to be constant testing of that and running of the system. Projectors are also noisy, and you generally need to build them into very large soundproof blimp boxes, and also may have to calculate for dubbing in post-production to overcome the sound of the projectors on set. You can't really turn projectors off overnight without time-consuming resyncing processes the next day. And then you still have associated costs in post-production because most of what's shot will need further visual effects enhancement. So what else is there? Well, virtual production we all heard a lot about, and LED walls and volumes, and in-camera visual effects. So during the pandemic, LED volumes were announced as the magic solution for all forms of film production, which is understandable at the time because they provided a secure and closed environment for cast and crew. But since then, more has been learnt about the pros and the cons of them. And it's fair to say that a huge step forward is the ability to now supply in-camera visual effects for car interior scenes. This saves massively on costs for location access, road clearance permissions. You're no longer dependent on the weather. If you have bad weather on the day that you've got your permissions, You don't need a low loader to mount the car on and a lot of equipment, and you don't need nearly as much crew. So it's become the go-to solution for these type of scenes in film and television series, and also for car commercials. And again, it's worth mentioning the reflective surfaces, because cars have a lot of chrome and metal reflections inside and outside. So being surrounded by a convincing background on top and sides is something that's a great leap forward from shooting this on a green screen, which would be more time consuming. LED volumes are also great for shooting different times of day and night. When you work in a volume, filmmakers have a whole new set of tools that they can use. They can adjust color and exposure of the image behind them. They can adjust times of day. They could shoot a sunset, for example, for as long as it takes. They're not tied into the 30 minutes that you would normally have outside maximum for a sunset. It's possible to sample colors for adjacent LED lighting panels. And generally, the camera stays stationary rather than panning through the set. And the image is the thing that's panned to the left or the right to find the optimum position. It's possible to seamlessly change into a night sky from a day sky with additional lighting effects. LED volumes tend to be used more for landscapes and natural environments, which can fit into the curve of a volume well. Often they have a small physical set in the foreground. And it's always a challenge when you're working in an LED volume, because if you want to have a fine degree of control, you do need to have a large number of people all working in a brain bar, sometimes up to 8 workstations, custom building content for you on a lot of equipment in real time, which makes for very expensive shooting costs, as well as slowing you down on set. So currently, right now, there's a shortage of trained personnel to operate the equipment, but that will change in time. And although content is now available to rent as stock footage for car interiors, it doesn't seem to me personally that an LED volume can replace scenes in a script which call for an actor to move from one room into a hallway, perhaps up the stairs and into another room. There's also another problem, or not problem, but issue with LED volumes. If you look at the top left image, the wheeled rostrum of the Barbie set piece, traditional film sets such as this, or an apartment which I was talking about, can't be constructed in an existing LED volume because the screens are too sensitive to dust and dirt. And even small amounts of sand and earth can be problematic. So instead, it makes more sense, if you have this situation, to complete construction of the set first and hire in LED screens afterwards, very much in the same way as you would do with a traditional backdrop. So given that this is the chosen route, then this needs a different solution. And it needs one that you don't need a 3D virtual set, because you've already got a real physical set in the foreground. But you do still want to have all the new tools that are available in virtual production to compose the image in real time in the studio on LED screens. And it would be great not to have to employ a ton of technicians and equipment. So what you're seeing here is a new product from Rosco we're very excited about. It's called RDX Lab, the Rosco Digital Experience Live Action Background. This is a natural evolution of the photographic still backdrops, which makes use of 2.5D layered images as opposed to 3D. Given that cinematographers and production designers want to be able to manipulate the image, and they want to have the ability to change their minds and make decisions along the way while working in the studio, RDX gives a full degree of control over the background image. And it's super easy to use on an iPad or a tablet by pretty much anyone on set. It could be anybody from the runner up to the first AD or the gaffer. Because the system makes use of Rosco's existing library of high-res images, which have already been shot at several times of day and night. It saves massively on prep times, which are reduced from perhaps several months for a 3-dimensional virtual reality set down to several weeks for this. The RDX Lab system can turn all of these images into animated content for pretty much any LED wall system or stage, regardless of size. So I'm going to let the film run to the end. There's a few more features to see here. It's possible to change the appearance and the depth of the image, and also to add motion elements in the background, which are all controlled to run with the camera for multiple takes. So this was recently used on Full Circle, which was directed by Steven Soderbergh for HBO, and it was used as the background to the main standing set, which was seen in every episode. And you can see here on the left the tablet that was used to control the image by the gaffer, Derek Goss. So let's have a look at all of these factors again. What are the things that decide to have what kind of background? So the biggest decision maker is the budget. In-camera effects. Do I have them, or am I working with a green screen? What kind of lighting control do I have? What are my lighting options? What are my associated costs in pre-production? And this could include content capture, transporting of the background to the studios, rigging. Do I need to do a lot of testing? What are my associated costs in shoot? Do I need additional crew? Are there expensive running costs? Is it noisy? Do we need a lot of syncing? And how is it to light? And what are the associated costs in post-production? How much visual effects is going to be needed? How easy is it to dispose of the background afterwards? Are there any recycling possibilities? So, as mentioned before at the start, there's usually a combination of any of those options that I've just shown. But what I haven't yet shown you is some backdrops, which is actually what this talk is about. So let's have a look at some of these case study backdrop drops with all of these factors in mind. So a really good example of this decision-making process for a background is John Wick 3. There was a glass cube, three-story block was in the script as a set, which was built as a set. And the filmmakers had basically 3 options or 3 ways to approach it. One would have been blue screen, one would have been an LED panels video wall, and the other one was a printed backdrop. So the problem with blue screen is it's a glass set, so there were reflections everywhere, and it would have been hugely time-consuming and expensive to remove all of those in post-production. And video wall was another option, but this was back in 2018, and it was not as developed then. The technology was not as developed then as it is now, and was hugely expensive. And so it made sense to the filmmakers to use a backdrop because it gave the right background effect and it fitted into the budget. And in this case, the filmmakers decided to use a Rosco soft drop because of the matte surface, which made it perfect for lots of reflections. Plus, it has a height of up to 39 foot, which is 12 meters, times 120 foot, 40 meters wide, without a seam, which made it a better choice than other available backdrop materials. And this shows a sketch from the concept artist Alex Nice of how this would work on set, with the built set on the left-hand side and the backdrop on the right, along with a built billboard element. And this was produced by Rosco at 100 meters by 12 meters in 3 parts. It's a double-sided night print, which is different to a day-night print. It's the same image printed front and back, which means it works great for nighttime because you can give it strong backlighting without any loss of blacks or contrast. And it's also available to rent. I believe there's a link being posted in the chat right now for a blog post which tells you all about another production that used exactly these three screens for a completely different show. So a photographic backdrop can end up, like here for John Wick, being the best compromise solution for the background because it fulfills the greatest number of those screen value decisions: the script, the shooting logistics, and the budget. Here's another image from Halston. I showed one at the start. So much of Halston's life and scenes in the script was spent in office space that Mark Ricker, the production designer, had to recreate that office with huge mirrors and red carpets, floor-to-ceiling windows, and stunning panoramic views of Manhattan from the 21st floor of the Olympic Tower. And you can see here the mirror glass reflections. They actually, with the soft drop behind, which is working in the same way as the projection screens were that we saw in Oblivion, and reflecting back the color and the light as well as the image back into the studio. You can see here the foreground miniatures of the St. Patrick's Cathedral spires. Because these were so close to the actual Halston office building, they were removed from the image, which was photographed by Rosco on site and built instead as foreground miniatures, which served two purposes. They connected the set, the foreground set, to the background, the backdrop, and then they also moved with camera tracking movements as it panned through the set. This image also shows the depth of field softening filter, which is applied to the image on every backdrop image by Rosco, so that you have the sense that the depth of field goes way out beyond the plane of the backdrop. It starts off soft in the foreground, gets softer in the midground, and softer still in the defocus towards the background. This had a large seamless size, which I mentioned before for soft drop, which made it very fast and easy to rig in the studio. Doesn't need any or didn't require any extra manpower outside of the usual stagehands, and also gave live in-camera effects, such as can be seen here, where the camera is outside the set, shooting back in, and you can see the reflections of the soft drop on the glass. So Mark Ricker chose a backdrop, and in this case, a Rosco soft drop, because of the large size and the matte surface, and because of the depth of field softening and the ease of handling and rigging, but also being able to send it back into Rosco rental stock afterwards for recycling to another production, tied into sustainable filmmaking ethics, which are becoming more and more important these days. The Colony. This was a futuristic film set in a dystopian planet and was shot on the mudflats of northern Germany. So the mudflats is an area where the tide goes out so far that you don't see the water anymore, and you're just left with this very futuristic, alien-looking landscape. So the shooting logistics, although they dictated a studio set, that the filmmakers planned to shoot on location, but clearly when the tide is coming in and going out, and it's not practical to shoot most of the film there. So they needed to have a studio set, but they needed to have a background that could mimic the very otherworldly lighting and textures of the flats location. This was a low-budget science fiction film produced in Germany, and there wasn't enough money for LED screens in the studio. And actually, neither the cinematographer nor the production designer were convinced that this would be the right aesthetic. So Marcus Förderer was the cinematographer on this, and he was also Rosco's first soft drop customer back in 2014 for Stonewall from Roland Emmerich. And has since come back. We've worked with him many times on other drops. So he has along with Julian Wagner, the production designer, they both have a very deep understanding of Roscoe's potential, the soft drop potential, and how it can be lit. So this was 9 meters high and 90 meters wide. And the top image shows the front side and the lower image shows the reverse side of this drop, which was a mixture of a kind of scenic photographic artwork. This was a backdrop that was used more for pure lighting effects and less for imagery like we saw in the Horton one previously. All other backdrops can only produce up to a maximum height of 5 meters, which is often all you need, so it's fair enough. But in this case, where it needed to be 9 meters high, you would have had a visible horizontal seam running through the whole drop. And this is probably one of the most abstract drops that Rosco has produced to date. And you can see from these images kindly supplied by Marcus Foderer how well it worked when you compare the location shots to the stage shots. And here's another shot of the part of the set elements that were built on stage. In this case of a photographic backdrop being the right decision, in this case a soft drop being the right decision because of the size, again, because of the script and the shooting logistics, and because of the available budget, and ultimately also because of the visual aesthetic which they were looking for. So here's another completely different example, and you might recognize this as being from Blade Runner 2049. This had foreground action with physical and virtual effects, meaning actual gunshots, virtual gunshots, which you can actually see firing out of Ryan Gosling's. You can see a tiny little flame there. Virtual gunshots, fire, explosions, shattering glass. And if you have that in the foreground, this dictates that the background has to be a non-virtual choice with in-camera live effects. So again, this was one of the largest, this is the largest drop, I believe, that Rosco has produced to date. It was 20 meters high and 95 meters wide, and was produced using original artwork from Steve Mitchell, who's a very talented scenic artist in the UK. Steve produced a much smaller template, which was then photographed and used as the basis for this gigantic drop. And you can see in this image on the left-hand side, the glass reflections of the 4-meter-high windows built on a 4-meter-high rostrum. And you can only imagine if this had been a green screen instead of a backdrop, that there would have been a complete green soup with all of the reflections going on. So this was a soft drop that was chosen as a background, again, because of the size and the matte surface, and because of the lighting options, and because of the foreground virtual and special effect action. And it's fair to say it was less so because of the cost on a film like Blade Runner, although it still ended up being cheaper than any of the other alternatives. And I'd like to paraphrase the great Nathan Crowley, the production designer, from an interview he gave about his work on Interstellar. And he said, a good rule of thumb for visual effects work in any frame of a film is to mix mediums and to not draw attention to the format being used. So if you think about foreground, midground, and background, only one of these should carry visual effects work. So coming back to Earth, modern architecture often has large windows and no curtains. It was an area that had to match to an exterior shooting locations. And there were scenes in the script at different times of day and night. And an LED wall was too expensive, so the filmmakers decided to go with a backdrop instead. And this is an interesting use of static stills in what you might think you would miss the movement in the background with the static trees and that they're not waving in the wind. But the fact is, sometimes, and this is a really good example of it, movement in the background can be distracting because you don't notice that it's not moving because you're focused on the foreground action. And in this case, it's Mr. Bean. So of course, you're going to be looking at him a lot. So here's some set stills kindly provided by Callum Ross, the gaffer. Again, you can see here there's a small physical set that connects the background to the foreground set with a piece of garden, which again works very well for camera tracking through the, with parallax issues for camera tracking through the set. So I'd just like to talk a bit here about the edit process and the photo shoot. The top image shows the original photos that were shot at the location in very early spring in March. And the middle one is what it was turned into digitally by Rosco using reference pictures supplied to us by the location owner, which luckily, because we didn't know what it looked like in summer. And the bottom image shows what we turned the day image into for the nighttime image and for the night scenes. Just let that one show up again there. So building a backdrop image takes time, and it also needs quite a specific skill set so that you are able to establish the right scale, meaning how far away the buildings appear to be relative to the distance the drop is in the studio and the camera position in the set. And establishing that and the horizon line and the right crop is something that takes time, which is not usually available if you're working in prep on a production. And it's also not something that everybody knows how to work with. So I know I didn't when I was working as an art director. And if that's the case, then it's maybe good for you to know that Rosco actually does the work for you. We don't expect you to give us print-ready files. Instead, we take all of that work off your hands, giving you more time and bandwidth for other things. But we work in very close communication with you and the cinematographer to adjust and refine the image until you're happy. Is soft drop expensive? Well, there's always going to be a cheaper material to print on. But our experience tells us that the most expensive backdrop is the one that doesn't work. And this is a good workaround for lower budgets, which is a small German film called This Crazy Heart. And they printed a single-sided day drop, which is a lot cheaper than a day-night, and turned the lights off at night. So if you have an image that's already been established during the daytime scenes, oftentimes this budget solution works just fine because you have foreground interior evening lighting cues, which make the background a believable background. And I think it works really well here. So what do you do if you've decided for a Rosco day-night soft drop? And even more important, what do you do if you'd like one, but you don't have enough money? So don't panic, you've got three options. First of all, you can hire a Rosco rental soft drop. I'm showing some of them here, which are available in the Madrid warehouse. Most of the drops we produce as custom sizes for specific jobs get returned to our 3 warehouses after shoot, where they go into rental stock. So this is a good way of recycling and having a low carbon footprint on your film production. Rosco has the warehouse in Madrid, which I mentioned, plus another 2 on the east and west coast of the States. Here's an example from the website and what you can expect to find there. You can download high-res images to the desktop so that you can use them in discussions with the director or for mood boards. So the second option, if you can't find anything in the rental catalog, is to make use of our image bank archive. We have thousands of locations across the world, which comes from shooting custom photography jobs for the past 30 years. And the third option if you do need to have a custom-made drop because of the script, which has exterior location establishers and interior studio sets with matching views, then you can ask me to shoot here in Europe or any other Rosco photographer that we have who covers the rest of the world. And finally, my colleague Phil Greenstreet, that's the guy who won the Oscar that I mentioned back at the beginning, and myself made a series of soft drop masterclasses a few years ago, which are aimed at film students and those new to backdrops. So these short videos cover most of the basic information you'll need to know. And so check out the YouTube link that's being posted in the chat now. So here we are, we got to the end. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation, and I hope you found it valuable. If you've got any questions, please just post them in the chat, or you can contact me on my email at sarah.horton@rosco.com. Let's create something brilliant together. And we're back live. Hi. I hope that was interesting for you. And I guess it must have been because you're still here. There's so much going on every day this week for the Production Design Week that I'm truly grateful that you have tuned into this when there are so many other amazing things happening at the same time. So I can see that a lot of questions have already come in. So let's start straight away and we'll jump to the live chat at the end if we have time. Is there any good formula for establishing the correct horizon line? It's a good question. So the horizon line, yes, there is the short answer. The long answer is that the horizon line is a critical factor in building a backdrop image, and you get it right, and it can look like there's no backdrop outside, and you get it wrong, and all you're going to want to do is close the curtains, and it's going to end up being one of the most expensive backdrops of all time because it's not going to work. So the horizon line basically is decided by the height of the camera. We take a standard camera height, which is 4'9", 1.45 meters, as the height of the horizon line in any backdrop image. However, if your set in the studio is built on a rostrum, then your horizon line height is going to be higher, is going to be, say you have a 3-foot rostrum, which is 1 meter, then your horizon line height will be 3 foot plus 4'9", or 1 meter plus 1.45 meters. So you'll be at 7'9", 2.45 meters for your horizon line height. And it's worth mentioning that a lot of sets that we do jobs for are, for example, a penthouse apartment set, which for budget reasons can't be built on a rostrum, but have to be built on the studio floor. So this means that you would only have the lower part, the lower 4'9" section of your drop would actually have buildings, and everything above that would be sky. So what's the next question? How to achieve the correct perspective when placing a backdrop? What are the things to keep in mind? Another really good question. So I'm going to interpret perspective here to mean the scale, which I mentioned a little bit in the presentation, meaning every backdrop image has to be scaled so that the size of the buildings appears to be the correct size, proportionate to where the camera is inside the set. So, and that could vary depending on what your image is. You could have a narrow street or a wide street, a wider street, or you could have a panoramic cityscape view. So the scale of the buildings and how close they are to the existing set windows will be decided by that. And there's basically it's a fairly simple mathematical formula where the distance in the studio, the distance that the backdrop is set away from the studio set windows, is divided by the distance that the buildings are in reality, and out of that comes a ratio, a scale which you can scale the entire image to. It's something that it's one of those things that Rosco will take over for you, particularly at a time when you probably don't have much bandwidth in the art department to do that. And generally we would work it out what we think is correct, send you back a rough version and say, please check this in your SketchUp model or your 3-dimensional model and see how it looks. So what's the next question? What is the optimum distance from a window to the backdrop? That's 16 foot, which is 5 meters. And this information, by the way, you can find in the masterclasses that we mentioned, that were mentioned. The reason for that, for this distance, is that when you're lighting a backdrop, you want to have an even wash of top-down lighting, very similar to daylight. And at the same time, you need to have enough space to light into the studio set. So we've just 16 foot is enough for both of those things without spill light from one interfering with the other. Next question. How long do I need to plan in advance of shooting when ordering a backdrop? So as long as possible is, is the short answer. The longer we have, the better the image will be, simply because more people have more time to spend on it, and we work together to refine everything to get to the best solution. But generally speaking, once Rosco receives the raw photographic files, we build the image for you and work very closely with you and get approvals from you. And then we produce it and ship it. And that process takes from 4 to 6 weeks. It's normally 4 to 5 weeks, but when we, in periods when we have a lot of work, that can extend up to 6 weeks. So that's the production time. But then if you work back from there, you're going to have to supply the photos, which means having gone to a location and before that to take the photographs, which means finding the location and getting the permission. So it's at least 8 weeks, possibly 10, the whole time period. And the best, or the most, a lot of very experienced art directors will get in touch with us in the first week of their pre-production, even if they don't know what they need. Just to start that conversation with us. It's always great. So the earlier, the better. Next question. Does camera movement and parallax need to be taken into account when building the backdrop image? Yes, is the short answer. I think there's a blog, a link being posted about the blog on Horton. So that the backdrop that you saw for Horton offered the camera 270 degrees of movement without parallax issues. And what is parallax? In case you're wondering, it's when you have a 3-dimensional object and the camera tracks past it. So obviously what you're going to see on that changes depending on where the camera is. So at Rosco, what we do is we take the images and we flatten out, we build a very unnatural perspective where we accommodate the shape of the backdrop in the studio, which often has curves. It has straight sections and curves. It can be a T shape, a U shape or an L shape. And we will build the image to work, to be optimized to the shape of that, of the drop on the stage, which means that the sections that are straight would have images which are parallel to the camera axis, and the sections where are curved, we would generally build a more open view into those ones there, because you want to avoid having full height buildings in curved sections, because it tends to look strange for the camera when it's tracking. Next question. Can I send you my own photos? Yeah, absolutely. We work all the time with customer supplied art. We also work with digital art. There are a couple of parameters, mostly to do with resolution, that need to be observed, but you can, it's absolutely possible, and we can talk about that depending on whatever the job is. Yeah, I think that's about it. What's the next question? Can I make use of the library images without ordering a backdrop from Rosco? This is a really good question. Yes, you can, and it's something new that we're introducing. It's possible for you to buy a non-exclusive license to use Rosco images for use on an LED screen, for example, or LED wall, or for use on a green screen, visual effects post-production, or indeed to buy the images and have them printed by a third-party printer. So please do get in touch with me, and ask if you're interested. Next question. Have you any recommendations what to do with backdrops at the end of a job? I've seen them put into storage, never to be seen again, and it seems like such a waste. Yes, doesn't it? It really does. It breaks my heart. So this is, as I mentioned, one of the reasons why we have the rental program, which is a great way of minimizing that carbon footprint of backdrops. There are other productions who prefer to maintain the backdrops after shooting, I think mostly for copyright reasons and for NDAs. So so those never come back to us. But we do offer this program, and it's a good way of at least going some way towards sustainable filmmaking practices. Next question. Is there a rule of thumb for how large the backdrop should be in relation to window size? So yes and no. So the backdrop needs to provide enough cover for the camera when the camera is moving through the set. And obviously, if you have larger windows, that's going to need to have more cover, i.e. a larger drop, than if you just had small window openings. Generally speaking, it would be the art department, the draftsman, the set designers, or the art director who would, in pre-production, work out either on paper using the old-fashioned way, using camera angles, taking a fairly wide lens like a 24 or a 28 to see a kind of worst-case scenario, or using these days 3D CAD programs such as SketchUp or Vectorworks to establish what the outside edges are going to be, or what's going to be needed for the size of the backdrop with the camera in the set, looking out through the windows with the backdrop placed at 5 meters away. And that it's mathematics basically, and you will be able to establish at that size, at that way, what size the drop should be. However, what quite often happens is that you work out that the drop has to be way bigger than what you actually have available in your budget. So then things like foreground curtains can become very useful, and window dressing, because it hides a multitude of sins, because you can draw the curtains in a certain way so you're not shooting off the backdrop. I hope that answers that question. I don't think it's only cinematographers. I think it's also, it's not, and I don't think it's necessarily a reluctance. I think there's different lighting methods on a soft drop as opposed to other vinyl drops, perhaps, or polyester drops. Many people, which is understandable, like to work using the products that they know, rather than adopting something new that they're not used to. We do have a very active film school program where we donate a soft drop to film school students who are able to then light it and test day-night, how to get the day-night effects on their own student projects. So this is one way of doing it. And yes, I think that's basically, that's probably, move on to the next question. Is it hard to light soft drop? What are the differences to other backdrops? Well, the difference is that, and you can see this in the masterclasses, by the way, that it's not hard to light soft drop at all. In fact, it's incredibly easy. And you need very little light to light soft drop compared to vinyl or polyester, which are much thicker materials. And so if you're backlighting through those, you need a lot more light to get to physically see behind, when you're pumping light through for night effects. So one of the biggest differences with soft drop is that it's a cotton weave, so that where you would place lights for a vinyl drop at a 90, here's my drop, like that, at a 90-degree angle, if you do this with soft drop, you will see the light sources. So what we suggest is putting the lights on the floor behind it and let the light wash up the back of the soft drop, which gives a very similar effect to night lighting, which comes from below the horizon line. And all of this is explained in the masterclasses, and there are a lot of lighting tips in there. So night lighting for soft drop can be done in many different ways. We have a range of tips for cinematographers, but our experience has been that we tell them this is how you could do it, and they tend to go off and light it in a completely different way, and it always works. So next question. I think that's... Our soft drop arrived folded and we had a curved rig, so stretching across the rig could only help so far. Any yes, yeah. The creases fall out on soft drop overnight. It's like a heavy curtain. And as long as the soft drop is fixed off on all four sides, so the tension comes from top and bottom, and then you just tie off the sides, and the creases will fall out progressively the longer the drop hangs there, because it's the cotton weave, and the threads just need time to fall into place. But we have found in our experience that 24 hours is absolutely sufficient. And it's not necessary to steam to remove the creases. They will go away naturally. It's a natural substrate. So I think that's, oh, here's another one. What impact has generative AI made in creating images for backdrop images? So far, nothing. We know it's coming. I think the thing about AI is there's a huge unresolved issues with copyright. So that when we build a backdrop image, we have to supply certain licensing, or we have to be sure of the licensing rights in the imagery. But the problem with AI is that this doesn't seem to apply. So I think there's a long way to go in terms of legal parameters for AI before we get to a point that we would be using it in backdrops. So I think, I think we're gonna start wrapping up the questions now. I'll answer that question, but I just wanted to say that I think that's gonna be the last one for now, because it's nearly an hour. Could you show that question again? I didn't see it. Was there one? No. Okay, all right. Well then, it looks like we're out of time. So if your question wasn't answered, please do email me. My email should be in the chat, and it's sarah.horton@rosco.com. Thank you so much for coming and for all of your great questions. I know that all of us at Rosco have been following events every day for the Production Designers Week, and we are going to be at the British Film Designers Guild Art Department Takeover at Helix Construction, which is being held at Indie Zero Studios this Saturday in London. If you would like to show up in person, the link is being posted now. Have a great day and see you soon.